All right, today we're jumping into a really powerful modern parable. It's all about what happens when the complex systems we all depend on just stop. It's a story about how fragile things are for sure, but more importantly, it's about how resilient we can be. Let's get into it.
So, the story kicks off not with a huge bang, but with this deep, chilling silence. Just try to imagine that for a second. Your phone is dead, every screen is dark, that constant digital hum of modern life is just gone. This one sentence really sets the stage for a crisis that's all about absence, not destruction. And that really is the big question here, right? When that invisible infrastructure that runs basically everything just vanishes, what's actually left? What do you do when all the tools you take for granted every single day are suddenly not there? Well, this parable digs into exactly that.
Okay, so before we can even talk about how people responded, we've got to get our heads around the vulnerability itself. This part is all about the super intricate, interconnected systems that make our lives possible, and, well, how shockingly easy it is for them to break.
You know, this source material calls our society a fragile miracle, and that just nails it, doesn't it? I mean, think about it. Supply chains, communication networks, the power grid, it's all these systems layered on top of other systems, all tweaked for maximum efficiency. When they work, you don't even notice them. But when one little piece fails, the whole thing is at risk.
And you can see just how fast that miracle comes apart. It's a cascade, a total domino effect. First, the screens go dark. That means first responders immediately lose their digital tools. Then, hospitals, which rely so heavily on computers, are suddenly thrown back into the dark ages with pen and paper. And of course, without communication or power, the entire supply chain just grinds to a halt.
And this right here, this is such a crucial point. The failure wasn't about a lack of courage or will from the people on the ground. The problem wasn't a lack of heroes, it was a lack of connection. You had all these first responders ready and willing to do their jobs, but their systems were gone. They were basically defeated by being disconnected. They couldn't coordinate, they couldn't communicate, they couldn't do their jobs effectively.
Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. It's not a tale of universal collapse. Nope. It's actually a story of a nation splitting in two, where how bad the crisis got depended entirely on what a community had done before the silence ever fell.
And this slide just lays out the two paths perfectly. On one side, you've got the unprepared areas, and it's just chaos. Communications are down, so people are duplicating efforts, wasting precious resources. And into that information vacuum, just anxiety and panic. But on the other side, the prepared communities look totally different. They had backup systems, sure, but the real key? They had organized people who knew what to do. That visible structure they created was like an antidote to the fear. So how did they do it? It's kind of funny, actually. It wasn't some fancy high-tech solution. In fact, it looked almost ancient. They were literally dusting off old plans from a binder, using printed-out lists of names, and relying on simple handheld radios. But guess what? These obsolete tools worked when the shiny digital world went dark. The key wasn't the gear. It was the human network. It was trained volunteers who knew exactly where to go and what to do.
And that, right there, is what this parable means when it talks about real civil defense. This isn't about Cold War nostalgia or hiding in a bunker. It's about a practiced, disciplined way of thinking about how society holds itself together. It's the muscle memory a community needs to function when things get really bad.
So in these communities that held together, there was this one specific group that made all the difference. The story introduces us to this idea called the U.S. Army Auxiliary, a totally new kind of response force that's actually built on a very old idea.
And this is maybe the single most important thing to understand about them. They weren't some outside force riding in to save the day. They were already there. They were local people, your neighbors, the person you see at the grocery store, already in place, already trained, and ready to go.
Their job wasn't to take over from the police or firefighters. It was to enable them, to make their jobs possible. They handled all the thankless but absolutely critical tasks: the logistics, the coordination between different agencies, and maybe most importantly, managing the flow of information. In a crisis, rumors spread like wildfire, right? Well, these folks were the source of credible, verified facts.
And that's where you see their real superpower. It wasn't weapons or equipment, it was credibility. Think about it. In the middle of chaos, just seeing an organized group of people in a familiar uniform calmly going about a plan, that does more to calm people down than a million empty promises that everything's going to be okay. Visible structure is calm.
So you can see how that structure really turned the tide over those critical first 72 hours. The first hour was just paralysis pretty much everywhere.
But by the 24-hour mark, the prepared communities had their manual systems up and running. By day 2, they were organized enough to be coordinating shifts, to prevent burnout. And by day 3, a real, sustainable rhythm of adaptation had completely taken over, where the initial chaos had been. So, after all is said and done, what's the ultimate lesson here? What did this fictional crisis, what did this quiet really teach us? I mean, just look at the difference. It's not even close. The unprepared regions took weeks to get back to even basic functionality. But the prepared regions, they were well on their way to recovery in a matter of days. That initial response made a massive, massive difference in the long run.
And this is it. This is the bottom line of the whole story. The deciding factor wasn't how rich a town was or how advanced its technology was. It was simply whether they had invested in training their own citizens to be a capable, organized force when a crisis hit.
I just love this quote because it really flips our whole idea of resilience on its head. We think of it as this big, heroic, dramatic moment, but this story argues that true resilience is built in the boring times. It's the repetitive training, the planning meetings, the drills. It's all that invisible work that suddenly becomes the most important thing in the world the second a crisis hits.
And let's be super clear about this. The auxiliary, these civil defense plans, they didn't stop the initial shock. That was never the mission. Their real victory was preventing that shock from turning into a long-term sustained paralysis that could have actually broken the country. They let society absorb the punch and then get right back up on its feet.
And so, the whole story brings us right back to where we started, with a question. But this time, it's for us. This isn't just some sci-fi scenario, it's a challenge. It forces us to look around at our own communities and ask a really simple but really profound question. Are we ready to absorb the next shock? The parable suggests the answer isn't in our technology, but in each other.